We're going to talk about lumens, how they relate to each other, how they relate to your DSLR, and flashlights and plastics and all those things. So why don't we get started? First thing that people don't usually understand about light painting is that it is a long exposure image, meaning you open your shutter, you leave it open while you paint, right, with your light, and then you close your shutter when you're done. You have to take into account the ambient light, city lights, moonlight, starlight, all sorts of things regarding your exposure, but there's usually a safe place to start, and that's usually f8, ISO 100. Go from there, and of course, Milky Way shooting, other things have extreme changes in ISO and aperture, but just for now, let's f8, ISO 100, your average lens maybe 24-70, focus on infinity, and you can give it a shot. Start with that. All right, so some tools that I like to use. Let's first talk about that. The number one tool that's the most important thing when it comes to light painting is your flashlight. So not just any flashlight will do. You can't just go to Home Depot and buy a single flashlight and think that it's going to work. That flashlight will only work for one or two scenarios. I like to buy a flashlight that has many, many lumen ranges. And when you do buy a flashlight, you want to write down the lumens on your flashlight so you know what the ranges are, because when you shoot Milky Way, your lumens are going to be about 50, and when you're shooting sunset, or not sunset, but more like blue hour, then you're going to need like 1200-ish lumens or more. All right, so very important, flashlight. Now, each shoot I do, I have about 10 different flashlights that I use, but this one is my favorite. It's made by Light Painting Paradise. They are in Spain, and it is very expensive, but it does things like strobe mode, and it has 10 different levels, not only of lumens, but also 10 different types of strobe. And then there's another type of strobe that has 10 settings on that, and it'll do a little flash. It does all sorts of things, but I do like this one. It's very easily changed, the lumen levels, and it has a lot of really great features. So I'm just going to go with that one and just show you real quick. The type of tools that you can purchase make a big difference. I've made my own from just about everything, which works great. But buying tools definitely can help you out. And I am actually a brand representative for something called lightpaintingbrushes.com. And I'm going to show you their tools real quick. So this is a plexiglass blade. All right. This is their universal connector. So the other important thing I didn't mention about flashlights is their size. So you want something that's roughly going to fit within a 1-inch area. And this rubber gasket that attaches to 1-inch things works great. So when I turn on the light, you can see that if you're wearing black and you're painting in the absolute dark and you're moving quickly, the only thing that the sensor is going to see is the actual light painting, right? So you can draw figures with this. If you're long exposure, right, your eye's not going to see it put together, but your camera will see it all as one swirl. And let me show you some examples real quick of that. All right, so maybe you have a better idea now of how that happens. And let me give you a little bit closer detail as far as the camera. So what happens is, I'll usually be in bulb mode, and you'll hear it click on. Turn the camera on first. You'll hear your camera click on. It's open, and I locked it open. You do your light painting, however long it takes you, however long you've determined. And when you're done doing your painting, you come back and turn it off. You check your exposure, you check your lumens. If it's way too bright, you turn the lumens down. If it's way too low, you turn the lumens up. If you're at the top end of your lumens, meaning super bright and it's still not recording, increase your ISO or change your aperture, okay? So it's a game, using your eyes as a light meter, but it's a really fun game. So let me show you something else that I've done. See how it's now in strobe mode? I make angel wings using this. So let me show you a behind the scenes of actually how it's done and what the result looks like. Here we go. What do you think? Most people think it's photoshopped. Most people think it's not real or that it's added afterwards. So this particular shot, why does it work? Well, I've balanced the exposure for the background, right? The stars, the Joshua Tree area where we had a little bit of light, not too much, but a little bit. ISO was 3200. I was open all the way to f2.8, and my lumens were stopped all the way down to probably about 50, if not a little bit less than that. So that's why it works. Another great tool, they're called writers. Light Write, like W-R-I-T-E, write, because you're going to write with them, right? Kind of like writing on a cake, right? But doing it towards the camera. So they have a nice, see if I can get a little bit closer. This one particular has a little gel crystal-y tip on it, which kind of makes controlling it a little bit easier and a little more fun. So let me show you how that's done. So typically what I like to use these for is to outline and trace each other to make a cool group portrait. So I would stand behind somebody and I would follow the trace of their body, right? Kind of hard to do on myself, but you get the gist of it, right? Follow all the way down, outline the entire body, and here's what they end up looking like. Using the same idea, here's a different type of writer that is sold. The light goes all the way through here, but I put some black tape to make the tip a little bit smaller. And let me show you what I end up doing with these. You could do the same thing where you trace each other, but if you do this, following the contour of the entire body, right? Obviously, you could do it on yourself, but I prefer to do it on somebody else. I have a little more control. Follow the hands, you know, follow the waist, the legs, things like that. Let me show you what I can do with those. Let's talk about another fun tool that I like to use. It's called a fiber optic brush. They come in many colors. The black I tend to use more because you don't see it, right? Obviously you see it right now. But while we're shooting, there's less chance of light being exposed. Right now it has an orange color filter on it. Light painting brushes has, I think, 8 different colors. The tool comes like this, right? And you can add any color with the universal connector to kind of give it some style. So I'm going to show you how I use these and typically what's done with them. They're great to make fake fire, right? You can see that. Manipulate it, shake it, swirl it. One thing people like to do is to do portraits like this. And here's what that looks like. Another thing I like to do is to make fire where fire is forbidden, such as Joshua Tree or the deserts. I do sometimes get people saying mean things to me because, you know, they think I took fire into the desert. But, you know, I'm doing it responsibly, right? So I have a shot where I shot a dragon in Anza Borrego. I'll show you that in just a second. But how I created that was doing this, right? Flicking and flicking and flicking and flicking on the ground, up and down. I just make sure not to cross my face, right, in relation to the camera. Otherwise, my face will disappear. and that makes great fire. If you do it behind somebody, like a model, and you're pointing it at the camera, that looks great as well. So let me show you some examples of how you can create fake fire using light painting brushes, fiber optic tool, and you can use either an orange or a yellow color filter. Another great way to light paint is just by adding colors to your walls. So these are color hoods. This one in particular is yellow. I attached a universal connector for my flashlight to go into. So I'll turn on my exposure, and let's say I want my background wall to be whatever color I want to pick. But this one right now is yellow. You can see that's yellow to the camera, and it's yellow on my background. So I would evenly paint, probably farther away so I don't have such a hot spot. But let's say I wanted the background yellow, right? Kind of fill that in. Do whatever other light painting I wanted to do with my creative tools. You know, maybe run that fiber optic down the face and then turn your camera off. Let me show you some examples of what it looks like when you use various color hoods in your background before you do your actual light painting. An important thing to remember when you're painting with colors like this. So let's say my lumens right now on this flashlight were 1,000 and I'm using yellow. So I'm going to have fairly close to 1,000 lumens. But if I change that to red or blue, sometimes even green, cuts the light almost in half. You can see the intensity and brightness isn't quite as strong. So that's something to take into consideration when you're light painting. If you use yellow on one side and blue on the other, just know that the blue is probably going to need to paint longer, right? Drag a little longer so it's stronger, and your yellow is going to have to go quicker because it's brighter, or use a brighter flashlight to do the same amount of time of light painting. Which brings me to that subject. How long to actually slowly paint something? So here's another way to make your lumens work for you. So let's say you only have a flashlight at home you want to try with. That's only, 100 lumens. And you desperately want to light paint, but it just won't show up on your camera. So what I suggest doing then, there's two ways to control how that light painting shows up on your sensor. So let's say this is 100 and it's barely showing up, right? I want this to show up, and I'm painting like Katrina showed us, but it barely shows up on the sensor. Well, you can try increasing your ISO a little bit, but if you don't want to because of your background or whatever, here's a great way to make that light right longer. You just go slower. So I would just then, almost like a snail, right? Do the same thing. Go a lot slower. That makes the light right a lot stronger. Now, the opposite is true. If it's just at its lowest setting and I'm doing this and the light it's too bright, I can't control it. How do I fix that without changing anything on my camera? Well, I just go faster. Check that. If it's still too bright, maybe I'm close, go even faster. If it's still not too bright, then make some adjustments, all right? So there's a couple different ways to handle that. So your speed has a lot to do with it. The color has a lot to do with it. It can cut those lumens in half almost when you have your darker tones. So just something to think about. So most people who look at my work really like my tube work, meaning the circles or the doors that I do with my model, who happens to be my daughter. So I made the model too. So let's talk about these. These are made by light painting brushes, and they're nice because they collapse down. Oh, this one I kind of modified to stay. I cut some holes in to do some other stuff. But they do close down to this short. So here's how it works. Let's say this is behind me. I turn it on. I make a quick circle and then I turn it off. Here's an example of what that looks like made with a light painting sword. The most important thing about getting a circle to actually be a circle is all about your hand movement. So let's talk about that real quick. I'm not going to turn on the light so you can see my hand, but when I do turn it on, well, if it'll turn on, there we go. Right? You're going to wait, use two hands, you're going to turn it on, then do your spin, then turn it off. But I'm going to leave it off so you can better see what I'm doing. The key is to keep your arm as straight as possible. All right? The first time people tend to do this. Do you see how I stayed off center, right? You want to keep this as centered as possible. You want it to move without moving. How does that work? Well, you're going to start off by holding it like this, and as you twist, you're going to end up only holding it by two fingers. Straight ahead, arm straight. You're going to turn it on. I'm going to turn it off so you can see better, and see how the center is not moving, and I'm going two fingers and then turn it off. All right, let me do it with it on. So I'm behind the model. I'll say 2, 1, open, turn it on, turn, and off. Now the trick to that looking good, there's a reason why the models have a dress. So where you're stopping and starting, you don't see too much overlap. But let's say it's a man and there's no dress and it's just a leg, right? So you want to start behind that leg and you want to finish behind that exact leg. So there's no overlapping of the light. So little details that you want to think about. But if you like the longer tubes, which a lot of people do, my friend Eric makes beautiful tubes. Probably too long to actually see. Oh, then we can see it. So most of the tube work you see with much bigger tubes are done with these. And see how pretty they are? They come in many, many colors as well, and many different styles. This is a milky style. There's also a style that is holographic. And what that looks like, you may not be able to see on this camera, but it's a little more reflective and a little more translucent. I'll show you some examples in a minute here. But the biggest thing, you need a cap. This one does not have a cap on it to control the light. When you have a cap on it, depending on if it's black, if it's white, this one is white. So a little bit of the white will come out of the end. So if I'm under a Joshua tree, so to speak, and I do a circle, the rim of the tree will get lit, the ground will get lit, giving it some ambient light. If I really want to control it and have no light coming out, well, I would just use a black cap. These are from lightpaintingtubes.com. There's a link on my website as well if you're interested in these. They come from Canada, and nobody makes these like Eric does. They're worth every penny. I can make anything, and I won't make these. I don't care. Take my money. They're that great. So these, I love Eric's tubes. They really are part of a lot of my beautiful images that I make with my daughter, and I absolutely love them. So. So light painting isn't always about taking a sword or a tube and creating light with the model. It's very subtle, and you probably aren't even aware that it was being used. So here's what I do in a lot of my astrophotography. Let's say I take a tent and I want to do star trails. Well, how am I going to have a light in there that's low enough lumens to stay on the whole exposure and to stay on for 4 hours? Well, I've got a great inexpensive solution. I'm sure everyone's been to the Dollar Tree or Michael's where you have these little tea lights. At 3200 or even 6400 ISO, when you're shooting star trails and you have a tent just sitting there, perfectly colored, right? Your blue sky and your orange tent. put one of these right in the middle. You won't even be able to see it with your eyes. But this is a great tool to light paint when you want to illuminate something like that. Usually you have a 20-second exposure. This will look a lot brighter to your sensor than it does to your eyes. So these tools are really inexpensive to light paint with, and I like to put them in arches. So like the boot arch in Alabama Hills, or Mobius arch, or just any kind of an arch. If you're a little bit below the camera's view, right, and the camera can't see the actual light, but you have it sitting in there, it will make a beautiful glow and give your star trail or your single point of light star image a beautiful ethereal feel to it. Let's talk about something else when it comes to light painting: direction. Just like flash, you never want to do it right off the camera, right? You want it side or from the back or from any angle except the front. So that's a real important aspect of light painting. You don't want to be pointing it at the camera. You want to be doing side to side. The only exception to that, I think, is probably this one, the little crystal writer, because that's just how it's designed to do, right? But when you have your other tools, side to side, not front to front, gives it a better effect. But you have to think in a two-dimensional way as well. So let's talk about your model. So if your model's standing this way, think about it in a silhouette type of situation. If you do just a tube circle behind the model and the face is forward, you're not going to see as much light. The face won't pick up as much of that light. But if your face is turned, right, you're going to get a lot more rim and edge, and you're going to see the beauty of the model, right? And the model, you don't want like this. You're not going to see the hands, right? You want something, I know it's a silly pose, but you want the pose to be side to side, right? Not so much anything in the front if you're not lighting purposefully, like with, say, the portrait light or something like that. If you're just going to be doing a circle, you want to have it look a little better by having the model pose intentionally sideways. That'll really help your images look a lot better. First question I usually get from people is, how are you not in the picture? How does that work? Well, as you can see, black has become my favorite color because I'm always light painting. So I try to not have any skin exposed. Sometimes I'll wear a wrap around my head with just my face showing. Depends on the lumens and how the lighting is. But typically, I just don't wear anything reflective. I don't wear white tennis shoes. I don't wear things like that. So the thing with light painting is, even though I have a light in my hand, let me get say, and I'm running around the model, right? I'm running around, I'm painting. Because it's pitch black, I don't write to the sensor. But now if I'm like this and I get this close to the light to me, then my face will be picked up. So you just want to make sure that you're far enough away from you that doesn't get picked up. All right? Keep moving. Don't stand still for long periods of time to let the light write to you. That's how you're not seen. And the other thing is, when you are doing the tube, behind the model like this, my daughter's a lot thinner than I am, but I will try to stand sideways and paint, right? Just to kind of keep myself a little more within her shape. Sometimes I'll even crouch just to be at her shoulders so that my head and hair don't get picked up in between hers. But typically, especially with the milky tubes, they will write you out, right? So if I were to do this, even if I was to be seen, the light would overwrite me because it's so powerful. So that really helps keep you to be invisible. If you are seeing yourself in your practice shots, just try to stay farther away, or maybe cover yourself up a little bit more and make sure you're wearing all black. Don't even have Nike written across your shirt, because that white will pick up and you'll see little streaks of white or whatever color from the words on your outfit. So things to think about, tips and tricks of how it works and why you're not seeing. So those are some of the basics you can do with tools that you can buy from lightpaintingbrushes.com and lightpaintingtubes.com as well. But you may not have the budget for that, which is okay. Sometimes I just like to make tools on my own because I can. And let me show you what I've done. So the Dollar Tree is a plastic paradise. It's always a great place to go to get water toys. These are those hoo-hoo things to squirt water. You cut them open, you take everything out, and look at that. You got a light painting tool, right? Just be sure not to point it at the camera, right? Keep it flat, front to side. Yeah, and you can make some beautiful stuff with those. Lots of different colors at the Dollar Tree. There's usually 3 or 4 colors. There's yellow, if you can even tell, blue with a red tip. These make great light painting tools. The trick is to remember to keep it flat. And if you do go forward, right, you just want to make sure that you're going forward like this and not so much like that. That's not going to be seen. But you can make circles behind the head, turn it off, start somewhere else, make different half circles behind your model, all kinds of things you can do. If you don't want to be seen, you just make sure that if I'm painting that I don't light myself up, right? Or I don't do this with me behind. You want to be forward. You want to stay next to the model as much as possible. And to avoid overriding the model, if you are the camera's line of sight, you just don't want to do anything like this across the model's face, because then it'll hide the model, right? So just anything you actually write with your light will stay. So just keep it low, keep it behind, and you'll end up with some really pretty stuff. If you don't want to buy tubes and you want to make them, let's say you have access to beautiful filter papers that are large, or some rice paper or some vellum, well, go to Home Depot. They're called T8, the letter T, the number 8, T8 tubes. These are protectors for the fluorescent lighting. You just roll some stuff up, put them in there, put your colors, tape the ends shut, maybe put some aluminum foil to reflect it back, or black tape, whatever you want to block that light. And you can make some beautiful DIY tubes on your own. It's a great place to start if you don't want to spend any money up front.